Alright guys, welcome to the third part of the XV-01 build and bag C, which would appear to consist of the steering and front suspension. Step 11. You need JJ12 and 13, the suspension mounts, and a pair of NN11s which are 1mm shims. Bag C has quite a few bits in it, so only open the sub bags as you need to. We'll need the steering posts, 4 8mm countersunk screws, and 2 6mm screws. Oh, and you'll need the chassis as well. We're starting with JJ13. Put one of the shims under it and slot it into the cutout in the chassis. Attach it with 2 countersunk screws. The threads are short, the plastic is soft, so be careful you don't over tighten. JJ12 goes in just the same, with its shim slotted into the chassis, and then pop in the 2 screws. The steering posts have 2 possible places to mount. Not sure if it's supposed to be for tuning, or if the other XV variants like the TC use it to get the correct geometry, as they use different suspension arms and hubs. The instructions, however, say to use the frontmost holes on this kit, so that's what we'll do. Pop one of the 6mm screws in from under the chassis and hold it in place with a screwdriver. Thread the post on the end of the screw with the flange towards the chassis. When it's finger tight, give it an extra tighten with the screwdriver. Do the same on the other side. The posts are aluminium, so they'll take a bit of torque, but still be a bit careful as it's not impossible to strip them. Step 12. The steering linkages. First up, we need some bearings, 4 of the larger ones and 2 of the smaller ones. If you're unsure which you need, don't forget the parts on the left are all actual size. You need 4 ball cups and 2 turnbuckles, 2 ball ends and a ball nut, a 10mm long grub and 2 8mm screws with low profile heads. From the KK parts tree, we need number 4, the drag link, 3 and 5, the cranks. We'll also need some of those foam dust covers. Okay, we'll start by fitting all the ball ends. Grab the drag link and put one of the ball ends in each of the 2 holes in the center. Do them up so they're just snug. Now take the bell crank and check the orientation with the diagram and fit the grub screw. Screw it in until there's about 5mm sticking out. Pop the ball nut on and do it up. Don't bother putting the bearings in the cranks yet, as they tend to drop out. What we will do though is pop one of the smaller bearings and screw in through the bottom of the drag link. Not too surprisingly, you need to do the same with the other crank. When done, it should look like this. Now pop a dust cover on each of the ball ends and put it off to one side. Next we're on to the turnbuckle linkages. Always a joy to put together. Right, the turnbuckles have the usual right hand thread at one end and a left hand thread at the other. Take one of the ball cups and thread it onto one end of the turnbuckle. You may need to press a bit while turning to get the thread to start. If you're having trouble, have a close look at the thread to see which way it goes. This is where it can get a bit tricky. The threads stiffen up quite quickly, so you'll need to hold the shaft with some pliers. Keep going until your part matches the diagram. Of course, there's another one to do, so you get to practice that again, which is good as there's a few more to make before this model's finished. Okay, we just need to pop the ball cup onto the ball ends now. You should be able to do it by hand as the cups are quite soft. For now I'm fitting them as per the manual, but I think the left side one might want to be flipped around as the hex on the turnbuckle looks like it will be a bit tricky to get at when the suspension is in. Step 13. Not a lot to do for this one, just fitting the steering to the chassis. We need, from the K parts tree, part 4, 2 8mm screws and 2 6mm screws. Start by putting one of the bearings left over from the last step over each of the steering posts. Follow them with the steering assembly and pop the last 2 bearings in on top. Now take the chassis brace and line it up. The outer hole should locate on the posts. Put the longer 8mm screw in the outer holes. Do them up so they're just a little loose. Now put the shorter screws in the inner holes that line up with the steering posts. Do them up nice and tight. Then snug up the outer screws. You should now have a working bell crank steering. Congrats! Step 14. Front hubs. There's quite a few bits packed into these, spacers that need to be double checked for position. It does make for a nice looking assembly by the end though. Okay, let's go. Grab C1 and C2, the front uprights. They are sided, so keep track of which is which. D1 and D2, the hubs, again these are sided. A pair of the F2 arms, these aren't sided, but we might as well continue the tidy layout of parts. 2 stub axles and 2 O-rings, 2 10mm screws, 4 short ball ends, 2 long ball ends, 2 kingpins, 2 M2.6 5mm screws, 2 of the long shafts with the slot in the middle, and 2 of the shorter plain ones, 2 bearings, and 2 of the smaller plastic spacers. Quite a lot of bits. There's a few more for the second part of the assembly, but we'll dig those out when we get to them, as we've got enough bits to try not to lose already. Okay, starting with the C1 and D1 side. Grab the upright and pop a bearing in from the inside. Pick up one of the stub axles and pop an O-ring in, making sure it sits nice and flat on the bottom. Feed it through the bearing on the upright. Now take the hub and line it up on the upright. Double check the diagram to make sure you're the right way up. Pop one of the plastic spacers into the hole on the top of the upright and feed one of the long ball ends through and screw it into the hub. Torque it up until it's nice and snug. Next, fit a kingpin into the bottom of the upright and again do it up so it's snug. There's no need to have them super tight though. Screw one of the short ball ends into the outer hole on the steering arm from the underside. And lastly, fit one of the 10mm screws into the hub. Screw it in so the screw is just bottomed out. This is just a steering stop. While we're here, pop a foam dust cover over the top ball end. Hub complete. You now need to put the other one together, which is just a mirror image of the first. But for me, it's easier just to jump cut. Okay, now we have a bit of space, we need to collect up the rest of the plastic parts. So, from the NN tree we need 4 number 2s, which are just little ball end things that fit into the suspension mounts, and a pair of 23s, which are just spacers. Yes, I got 4 out, I wasn't paying attention. First thing we need to do is fit one of the remaining ball ends into one of the arms. Fit it to the outermost of the 2 holes. Slide the hub into the short end of the arm and feed one of the short pins through the hole. Now fit one of the small screws into the hole next to the one with the pin. This will stop the pin falling out. Great for people who don't like E-clips. This bit can be a bit tricky as it tends to fall apart if you're not careful. Pop one of the long pins through the other end of the arm and pop one of the plastic balls over the frontmost end. On the rear we want one of the NN23 spacers followed by one of the balls. Carefully put it to one side and you guessed it, put together the other side. Step 15. Fitting the arms to the chassis. Really easy this one. You only need 2 countersunk screws, a JJ3 suspension mount and a NN26 1mm shim. Right. Carefully pop the arms into the mounts on the chassis. Watch out for the plastic balls making a break for it. Line the shim up in its slot at the front of the chassis. Take the suspension mount, pop the balls in and slide it into the slot. While keeping hold of the mount, flip the chassis over and fit the 2 countersunk screws. Do them up so they're nice and snug. This is an easy one to over tighten. Next, just pop the steering ball cups onto the balls on the steering arms and we're done. Almost worth playing with the steering now. Still a bit floppy though. Step 16. Another short one. Yeah, quite exciting as we get to marry up 2 large assemblies. Oh yes. For this one we need 4 8mm countersunk screws and 3 regular 8mm. And of course the chassis and front gearbox, which you can now slot straight in. Flip the chassis over and fit 4 countersunk screws into the bottom of the gearbox. Another good time for that cross pattern tightening. Back to the top of the chassis, and we need to link up the gearbox brace to the chassis brace. There's only 3 screws to install. Do them up nice and snug as usual. Just don't strip the threads. Step 17, and I'm sure you'll be happy, there's more turnbuckles. Anyway, parts collection. We need 2 dog bone drive shafts, 4 plastic ball cups, the front bumper, B1, 2 turnbuckles, 3 8mm countersunk screws, and 2 regular 8mm screws. I'm sure we all have fond memories of the steering linkage turnbuckles. These build up in just the same way, so I won't go into it in any great depth. Just make sure you end up with a pair that match the 1:1 scale diagrams. Right, we then put together, slot one of the dog bones into the diff cup and stub axle cup. The instructions want some grease on the ends, but it'll turn to grinding paste and destroy the metal parts in no time, so we're better off leaving them dry. Now grab a turnbuckle and pop one end on the ball on the gearbox brace, and the other end on top of the upright. Flip it around and do the same on the other side. Nearly there now. Grab the front bumper and slot it into the front of the chassis. Fit the 3 countersunk screws and the 2 regular screws. Do them up so they're snug. It's all plastic, so be careful. You should now have a very robust front end with working steering. Lovely stuff. And that's the last of bag C. Quite a good one, I think. Lots of nice mechanical bits to play with, just what kits should be. Next time it's bag D. It looks like we've got the rear end put together and the oil dampers. Should be fun. Thanks for joining us at RC Mojo. As always, if you haven't already, do subscribe as it lets you know when we upload more videos. If you like the video, share the love with that like button, and don't forget to check out the twits on Twitter. Bye!